So I just saw James Wan's Aquaman, and it was pretty funny. This is a movie that I've been ironically excited for quite a while, and I'm happy to say that it was pretty entertaining. Right from the beginning of the movie, it is just so hilariously ridiculous. The scene where he gets bullied at the aquarium was super cheesy and had some hilarious child acting. After that, we see Aquaman showing up to a nuclear submarine that some pirates are trying to hijack, and every time it cuts to him, it looks like he's trying to pose for a magazine cover. He looks at the camera and smiles with a raised eyebrow, and the soundtrack goes bwomp 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 bwomp. This happens several times, and it's very funny. One of the pirates had the genius idea of bringing a grenade launcher onto the submarine and firing it inside. The whole sequence is just so over the top and fun to watch, and the soundtrack during this sequence, trying really hard to be super cool, made it even more hilarious. Quite honestly, this film has one of the most tonally inconsistent soundtracks I've ever heard. It is all over the place. Sometimes it sounds like it's trying to be the soundtrack to The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Sometimes it sounds like it's trying to be Blade Runner 2049. In some scenes, the soundtrack attempts to be playful and funny. The worst moment in the soundtrack was when we were subjected to a cover of Toto's Africa by Pitbull.
From ocean to ocean, sea to sea, I'm something that you gotta see.
Gonna take a love to drag me away from you.
And the way it was used, it would have worked just fine if they had just used the original song. It started playing when they were flying over the desert, like, haha, Africa, get it? You all know this song, right? Yeah, let's reference it here, but let's also butcher it. This entire film feels like it's constantly ripping off other tones and stories, but what makes it so bizarre is that it can't seem to commit to just one. It instead decides to rip off everything at once. Oh no, I am banished from my homeworld kingdom, and I am the rightful heir to the throne, but my evil relative wants to take over the kingdom, and if I don't go back to take my place as king, then bad things will happen. There was so much of this movie that reminded me of things like Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, or whatever that was. The whole movie feels like one of those super high-budget Hollywood flops that nobody ever watched, but thanks to the power of advertising and brand recognition, this film made a lot of money. I mean, come on, if this was a new character that nobody had ever seen before and wasn't attached to previously successful franchises, then nobody would have seen this. Still, despite this film being entirely stupid, cheesy, nonsensical, and uninspired, it was not a total failure. There were actually a few interesting shots and sequences in this film. You can tell that James Wan really tried. Despite the 2.5-hour runtime, I was never really bored, and much of that was due to how all over the place this film was. This film easily could have been stale and repetitive, but it was constantly moving along to different scenes and set pieces. The one aspect to the film that started to feel really fucking stale was the amount of times that they had political discussions in the same setting. That was pretty boring. But other than that, the film was pretty entertaining. There was one other incredibly repetitive aspect to the film, but it was way more hilarious than boring. I swear to God, there's like 4 or 5 different scenes where characters are just talking like normal, and then all of a sudden there'll be an explosion from the wall beside them. Like, boom, the enemy's here, now it's a fight scene. It did not take long at all before it started to feel like a punchline. It was hilarious. The film has quite a few questionable decisions regarding its presentation, one being a flashback where we see Willem Dafoe training a younger version of the main character. There's no real reason why it couldn't have just been told near the beginning of the movie chronologically, and when it shows up in the film, it just feels so awkward. Like, hey, remember that time when you trained me? Yes, I do. Let's remember that right now. During this scene, the teenage version of the main character does not have many lines, but he still manages to royally fuck it up.
Well, wait, so you're saying that my mom was killed by Atlantis because of me?
It was awesome. The whole universe that they're presenting is flawed and ridiculous. Apparently, Aquaman is the only character that can actually communicate with marine life, and none of the other Atlanteans can. And yet they are seen riding domesticated sharks with saddles on their backs? What? There's a bizarre fight scene at an underwater coliseum where Aquaman challenges his half-brother for the throne. All these Atlanteans are sitting in stadium seating to watch the fight, but they're so far away that there's no way they can even tell what's going on. It keeps cutting back to them reacting like, whoa, yeah, that was awesome! But since they're underwater and can swim anywhere, the fight has moved to well beyond where the stadium could actually see. Like, the fight scene is taking place well above the Coliseum, but every time it cuts back to the crowd's reaction, it's as though they're looking down at them. You'd think that they would utilize their underwater hologram technology so that people could actually see what's happening, happening, but they didn't. The action and reaction shots look more like two completely different scenes that are not properly communicating with each other. There's also a really forced love interest that they threw into the film, and the plot winds up turning into some dumb scavenger hunt just so they can have the excuse of developing their relationship together. There is zero chemistry between these two characters, but goddamn, this film sure is gonna pretend there is. One of these scavenger hunt locations takes place in the middle of the desert, and they fall through a secret trap door, and they are now underneath the desert. And somehow there is plenty of natural sunlight lighting the entire set. Where is it coming from? You are underneath the desert. There's some doohickey that they brought, and they need to get it to work so that they're like, oh no, I guess it needs water because this place used to be water, but now it's super dry. So they put one drop of water on it and it starts working. Okay. So the whole motivation of the main villain is that he wants to start a war with the surface world. So he tries to get all of the other underwater kingdoms to join his battle, but none of them want to help out, so he starts wars with them first. And this is all within a very short time frame. Like, his main plan is to start a war with the surface world, but he is participating in an underwater war earlier that day. If you have so many fucking troops to waste that you can start multiple wars with underwater kingdoms and still have enough troops left over to be able to confidently start war with the surface world, then why even start wars with the underwater kingdoms in the first place? Why not just skip that part and start your war with the surface world? You clearly don't need their help if you can wage war with them on your way to the war that you actually want to wage. Seriously, that crab battle came out of fucking nowhere, but it was pretty entertaining, and that's why I still enjoyed the film. The biggest reason why I don't consider this film to be an absolute failure like it easily could have been is that it didn't take itself way too seriously. Now, I haven't seen most of the films in this specific DC Universe timeline, but this genuinely feels like a departure from those films. It didn't feel like a needlessly dark, boring, stale Zack Snyder film. Despite being a DC film, it's like they actually remembered to make it entertaining, which is a good step in the right direction. The reason why I haven't seen most of the films in this DC universe is because they look boring as fuck. And perhaps if the rest of them started taking themselves a little less seriously, then I might start being interested in them. As far as I'm concerned, this is possibly the best DC film in this universe timeline, and I hope they continue to make more like it because I was thoroughly entertained. This film is a complete failure when it comes to characters, writing, logic, acting, but it does not fail when it comes to entertainment. So whether you're watching this ironically or not, then I guess check it out. And I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10.